You know, there's something strangely intimate about words written in ink. They can travel miles, cross oceans, pass through dozens of hands, and still arrive like they were meant for you and only you. What if the love of your life had been writing to you for years, and neither of you knew? I didn't believe in fate, at least, not in the romantic, stars aligning kind of way. My life was too ordinary for that. Work, a home, the occasional movie night with friends. Nothing that would end up in a love song. But all of that began to change the day I slipped a letter into a small, weathered mailbox outside an old CAF. In our town, the sign above it read, "Letters to the unknown, for those who have something to say, but no one to say it to." I had no idea who would find my words. Maybe no one. Maybe some stranger who'd toss them in the trash. But that first day, I didn't care. I just needed to let something out. The letter was short. Only a few lines. "Dear stranger, I don't know you, but right now, it feels easier to write to you than to anyone I actually know. My life, well, it feels like a room without windows. I don't remember the last time I felt sunlight. But I hope you're seeing some today, wherever you are. I didn't sign it. I didn't date it. I just folded it, slipped it into the mailbox, and walked away. I thought that was the end of it. But a week later, there was a letter waiting for me. It was in the same box, sealed in a pale blue envelope with no name, just the words, "To the girl who misses the sunlight." I remember my hands trembling as I opened it. "Dear girl, I don't know who you are, but I've been where you are, trapped in a room without windows." For me, it was after my father died. The days felt heavy, the nights heavier. But sunlight has a funny way of sneaking in, even through the smallest cracks. I hope you find one of those cracks soon. A stranger, I must have read it 20 times. Not because of the advice, though it was gentle and kind, but because it felt like someone out there was real, listening. And so it began. For the next 3 years, I wrote to him. And he wrote to me. We never shared names. We never described ourselves in detail. We just told each other things we couldn't tell anyone else. I told him about the art I was too scared to show people. He told me about the little bookstore he was trying to keep alive. I told him about the night my heart was broken. He told me about the mornings he woke up early just to watch the street outside his window come alive. We didn't know it, but our lives were starting to weave together. And one day, those threads would pull tight in a way neither of us saw coming. But back then, it was just paper, ink, and the quiet comfort of knowing that somewhere out there, a stranger was thinking of me. There's a certain rhythm to anonymous letters. At first, you write like you're tossing thoughts into a well, expecting nothing in return. But when something does come back, you find yourself listening for the echo. That's how it was with him. I'd leave my letter in the weathered CAF mailbox every other Friday, right before work. And then, the next week, there would be his reply waiting like a small secret only we knew existed. I remember one in particular, about 6 months in. "Dear girl, do you ever wonder if we've passed each other in the street? I sometimes imagine it, walking by you without knowing. Maybe both of us carrying letters for each other in our bags. Maybe I've even handed you a book at my store. Or you stood behind me in line for coffee. It's strange, isn't it, that we could be so close, and yet so far." A stranger, I read that one in the park on my lunch break. And for the first time, I looked up from the page and actually studied the faces around me. A man jogging past with headphones. A woman laughing on the phone. A guy in a navy sweater sitting on a bench with a coffee. Was it him? The thought sent a shiver down my spine, not in fear, but in curiosity. My reply was a little more playful than usual. Dear stranger, if we have passed each other, I hope I didn't look too distracted. I tend to walk with my mind somewhere else. I imagine you'd recognize me. Not by my face, but by the fact that I'm probably staring at the sky instead of watching where I'm going. I trip a lot. The girl who trips, he responded 3 days later. Dear girl who trips, if I ever see someone staring at the sky and nearly falling over, I'll know it's you. And I promise I'll catch you before you hit the ground. A stranger it became. Something I looked forward to more than I should have. The comfort of it was unlike anything else. No pressure to impress, no fear of being misunderstood. Just two people writing in the safety of ink and paper. But life doesn't freeze just because you're happy in a small, quiet way. At work, deadlines piled up. Friends got engaged, moved away, or drifted into different lives. My mother began hinting that I was wasting my best years, and somewhere between the second and third year of our letters, I started to wonder if maybe I should try dating again. I didn't tell him about it at first. I don't know why. Maybe because it felt like a betrayal, even though we had no claim on each other. But then, one evening, while writing him a letter, I slipped it in. Dear stranger, I went on a date last night. It was fine. He was nice. But halfway through dinner, I found myself thinking about what I'd tell you about it. That's when I realized, no matter how many people I meet, you're the one I want to talk to at the end of the day. Girl who trips. When his reply came, it was short. Almost too short. Dear girl, I'm glad you're meeting people. You deserve to be happy. I just hope you remember that I'm happy when you're writing to me. A stranger. It was the first time his words felt heavier. Like there was something between the lines I wasn't supposed to see. And maybe there was. It started with little things. The first time was at the park. I was sketching on a bench near the fountain, people watching, like I often did when I saw a man standing under one of the tall maples, reading a letter. He had that stillness people get when they're lost in words, the world moving around them while they stay perfectly still. I couldn't see his face, not clearly, but I remember thinking how rare it was to see someone reading a handwritten letter. In public these days, everyone had their faces buried in phones. When I looked up again, he was gone. A week later, it happened again, this time in the coffee shop near my office. I was in line, debating whether to get my usual latte or try something new, when I felt someone behind me. I turned slightly, and there he was, the same broad-shouldered figure, wearing a navy sweater. He was holding a small pale blue envelope, the exact kind he always used. My heart thudded once. Hard.it couldn't be right. The odds were ridiculous. But when he stepped up to order, I caught the low, warm timbre of his voice, and something about it made my pulse quicken. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. We were just two strangers ordering coffee. And yet I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't a stranger at all. That night, I wrote him a letter. Dear stranger, today, I saw someone in line at a CAF, holding an envelope just like yours. My first instinct was to ask if it was you. But then I realized I don't even know what you look like. Isn't that strange? That you might have been standing right behind me, and I wouldn't even know. Girl who trips. His reply came faster than usual. Dear girl, it is strange. And maybe one day, we'll pass each other and somehow know. Not from looks, but from something else. I think if I heard your laugh, I'd recognize it anywhere. A stranger from then on, Every time I left the house, I caught myself scanning faces. At the market, on the bus, even in the bookstore I sometimes visited on quiet Sundays, a little place tucked between an antique shop and a florist. I liked wandering its narrow aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books, imagining all the hands they'd passed through. There was always a man behind the counter there, tall, with kind eyes. I'd smile at him in passing, but never more than that. He'd nod politely, ask if I needed help, and I'd say I was just looking. I didn't know it then, but that small bookstore was about to become the center of everything, because the man behind that counter was the one I'd been writing to. All along, the bookstore was the kind of place that smelled faintly of paper and old wood. It had mismatched chairs in the corners, soft lamps instead of harsh ceiling lights, and a little bell above the door that chimed when you came in. I'd been going there for months, never thinking much about it beyond the fact that it felt safe. I liked to browse the shelves in the back, where the poetry section was. Most days, there'd be a man behind the counter, reading a book or jotting something in a small notebook. He had a way of looking up when customers entered, his expression warm but unreadable, like he was letting you keep your secrets. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself there again, flipping through a worn copy of Letters to a Young Poet. The bell over the door rang, and he looked up, smiling at the new customer. That's when I noticed on the desk beside him a pale blue envelope, the exact same kind my stranger used. I told myself it was nothing. Lots of people used stationery like that. But the sight of it made my fingers tighten on the book. I wanted to ask who it was for, but what would I even say? "Hey, are you my anonymous pen pal?" Sounded ridiculous. That night, I wrote him a letter. "Dear stranger, have you ever thought about what it would take for us to meet? Not an accident like bumping into each other, but an actual choice to reveal ourselves. I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. Maybe part of me is afraid that the person I imagine isn't the one who'd be standing in front of me." Girl who trips. His reply came days later, and it made my heart ache. "Dear girl, yes. I've thought about it, and I think that's why I haven't said more. The mystery feels safe. You know the parts of me I've chosen to show. But in real life, there are the unedited parts. The tired mornings, the bad habits, the silences. I guess I'm afraid you wouldn't like all of me." A stranger. After that, I found myself visiting the bookstore more often. Sometimes I'd buy something small just to have an excuse to talk to him, though our conversations never went deeper than polite small talk. Still, I started noticing little things. The way he'd hum quietly when shelving books. How his smile lingered a second longer when he handed me my receipt. Meanwhile, our letters grew more personal. I told him about my mother's pressure for me to find someone before I turned 30. He told me about the nights he stayed up too late, afraid the bookstore might not survive another year. I told him how I dreamed of illustrating a children's book, but never found the courage to start. He told me he once wrote a story but never showed it to anyone. We didn't realize it yet, but the life we were describing in letters was one we were already sharing in the same town, just in different ways. And then came the day I almost found out. It was raining hard, and the CAF mailbox was nearly overflowing. I opened it to slip in my letter and saw another hand reaching for it at the same time. I looked up straight into those kind bookstore eyes. He froze. I froze. His hand tightened on the envelope, a pale blue envelope. Before I could say anything, he smiled, just a small, polite smile, and stepped back, letting me go first. I dropped my letter inside, my heart pounding, and walked away in the rain. Neither of us said a word. I didn't stop thinking about it. The rain, the pale blue envelope, the way his eyes seemed to flicker just for a second like he knew something he wasn't saying. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that the man from the bookstore couldn't possibly be him. But the thought burrowed into my mind and refused to leave. A few days later, his letter arrived. Dear girl, funny thing, I got caught in the rain this week, and for a moment, I thought I might have seen you. Maybe I imagined it. But there was this woman standing at the mailbox, and she smiled like she knew something I didn't. A stranger. I read it twice, then a third time. My smile. Had he actually noticed me? My reply was cautious. Dear stranger, maybe it was me. Or maybe it wasn't. Either way, I hope you didn't catch a cold in that rain. I've always liked the sound of it, even when it soaks me through. Girl who trips. The truth was, I was restless now. The comfort of our anonymity, once a warm, safe blanket, had started to feel like a curtain I wanted to peek behind. I found myself lingering in the bookstore longer, pretending to browse. I'd steal glances at him, wondering if he was doing the same. Once, I caught him watching me from across the room, but he looked away quickly, as if he'd been caught reading a private page. That night, I didn't just write him a letter. I drew him something. It was a sketch of the CF mailbox, with a little umbrella leaning against it. Underneath, I wrote, in case you ever want to picture where our words meet. His reply was different this time. Dear girl, I like the way you see the world. It's softer somehow, like you notice things most people pass by. And the way you drew the umbrella, it made me want to stand there, waiting for you. A stranger. It was the first time he'd said something that felt like a step toward me, not just a safe exchange from a distance, but just as I was starting to believe we might actually meet. Something happened that pulled us in the opposite direction, because 2 weeks later, his letter didn't arrive. Not that week, not the next. The mailbox stayed empty, and with every day that passed, I started to wonder if I'd lost him, without ever having him at all. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was busy. Maybe the bookstore had a big sale, or he was visiting family. Life happened. We'd had small delays before, but this felt different. Every day, I'd walk past the CF mailbox, my steps slowing as I glanced at it. Sometimes I'd open the slot just to make sure I hadn't missed anything, but it was always the same, empty. 1 week passed, then 2. By the third, my chest felt heavy in a way I couldn't explain to anyone. It's strange how you can miss someone you've never met, how their absence can feel as real as the loss of someone who's been sitting across the table from you for years. I tried to keep writing anyway, even without his replies. Dear stranger, I hope you're okay. I don't know what's happened, and maybe I'm overreacting, but I wanted you to know that I miss our letters. I miss you, whoever you are. Girl who trips. I left it in the mailbox, but deep down, I wasn't sure if he'd ever see it. Days stretched into more days. The world around me kept moving, people laughing in CAFS, couples walking hand in hand, the bookstore across town still lit up in the evenings when I passed by. I'd glance through the window and see him there, shelving books or talking to customers, and I'd feel this strange mix of relief and confusion. If he was my stranger, why had he stopped writing? Then, one rainy Thursday, there was finally a letter waiting for me. Dear girl, I'm sorry. I should have written sooner. My mother's been unwell, and I've been taking care of her. Some days, I feel like I can barely keep my head above water. I didn't want to fill your letters with worry, but I've missed you. More than I thought I could miss someone I've never met. A stranger. I held that letter to my chest for a long time before I could bring myself to read it again. The words felt different now, less like something from an anonymous friend, and more like a confession. That night, I wrote him back without hesitation. Dear stranger, you don't have to protect me from your bad days. I want to hear them. All of them. You've been here for me in ways you don't even realize. Let me be here for you too. Girl who trips, and for a little while, it felt like we'd found our rhythm again. But something about that silence had changed me. I didn't just want his words on paper anymore. I wanted to see his eyes when he spoke them. I wanted to know without doubt who he was. Once I'd decided I wanted to know him, really know him, it was like a switch had flipped. I started reading his letters differently. I searched for tiny clues, mentions of a late night at the shop, or the smell of coffee from next door, or Mrs. Callahan popping in again to chat about her cats. Little details that, on their own, meant nothing, but together began to form a map. A map that seemed to lead to only one place, the bookstore. I told myself I wasn't going to act on it. That the beauty of what we had was in not knowing. But I still found excuses to stop by, to browse, to buy a book, to linger by the counter just long enough to see the way his fingers curled when he handled paper. Every time, I'd walk out with a strange flutter in my chest, half excitement, half guilt. One Sunday afternoon, I was in the poetry section, crouched low to look at a bottom shelf, when I heard his voice, not reading to a customer, not talking about books, but laughing. It was deep and warm, and it wrapped around me before I even stood up. And I thought, if he's my stranger, I'd know that laugh anywhere. That night, my letter to him was shorter than usual. Dear stranger, I heard someone laugh today, and it made me think of you. Isn't it strange how sound can feel like sunlight? Girl who trips. His reply came quickly. Dear girl, maybe it was me. Maybe it wasn't. But if it was, I hope it made you smile. I think I'd recognize your laughter, though I've never heard it. A stranger. The pull between us was getting stronger, even on paper. I started sketching him, not his exact face, just the impression I had. The curve of a jaw, the shape of hands, the way his hair might fall forward if he was reading. I didn't send him these sketches. They were just for me, an outlet for the growing ache of wanting more. But wanting more was dangerous. Because once you start imagining the person on the other side of the page, it's only a matter of time before you want to turn it over, and fate, as it turned out, was about to do just that for me. Because the next letter I received wasn't in the usual pale blue envelope. It was white, and inside was an invitation. I almost didn't open it. For weeks, the pale blue envelopes had been our rhythm, our language. But this was different, plain white, no return address, the handwriting still familiar but somehow heavier, like each stroke of the pen had carried more weight. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dear girl, I don't know if this is crossing a line, but there's something happening next Saturday. A small gathering at the bookstore. Poetry readings, music, nothing formal. I thought, maybe you'd like to come. If you do, I'll be there. And if you don't, I'll understand. A stranger. My fingers trembled as I read it again. This wasn't an accident or a passing moment at the mailbox. This was an invitation. The choice was mine now. I carried the letter with me everywhere, the week folded in my bag, tucked in my coat pocket, slipped under my pillow at night. Every time I touched it, my heart sped up. I imagined walking into the bookstore and seeing him. Would we just know? Would he smile and say, "It's you"? Or would there be a flicker of surprise, maybe even disappointment, when he realized I wasn't the girl he'd built in his mind? By Thursday, I'd almost convinced myself not to go, to keep our world as it was safe, perfect in its own strange way. But that night, I got another letter. "Dear girl, forget the invitation if it makes you uncomfortable. I just wanted you to know that I think about you when I lock the shop at night. I think about you when it rains. I think about you more than I should." A stranger, that was the one that broke me. Saturday came, and I stood outside the bookstore, watching through the window. There were maybe 20 people inside, sitting in a loose circle of chairs. Someone strummed a guitar in the corner. And there he was behind the counter, adjusting a stack of books like it mattered deeply that they were perfectly straight. I took a deep breath. My hand was on the door, and then just as I was about to step inside, someone called my name. I turned. It was my ex, and he looked like trouble. "Clara," his voice cut through the hum of music from the bookstore, sharp enough to pull me back from the doorway. I froze. I hadn't heard my name in his voice for almost a year, but it landed in me like a stone tossed into still water, ripples of old hurt spreading outward. I turned slowly. There he was, Ethan. Same crooked smile, same easy confidence. Only this time, he was holding a coffee cup instead of my heart in his hands. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "I saw you from across the street," he said, stepping closer. "Didn't think I'd run into you." Not after everything. I glanced back toward the bookstore window. The stranger was still there, unaware, stacking books in that careful, deliberate way. Our moment was still waiting for me, but now it felt like sand slipping through my fingers. "I'm kind of in the middle of something," I said, already half turning back toward the door. But Ethan laughed low, knowing. "Always rushing off. Can't you spare 5 minutes to talk to an old friend?" Old friend. The word stung. He started talking about the job he'd taken, the city he'd left, the things he'd realized since we'd last spoken. I wasn't really listening. My mind was inside that bookstore, standing in front of the man whose letters had become my anchor. But when I finally turned back to the shop window, he was gone. The circle of chairs was still full, the music still playing, but the space behind the counter was empty. Ethan was still talking, but his voice had faded into background noise. The only sound I could hear was the soft creak of the bookstore door in my mind, closing before I'd ever stepped inside. By the time I finally broke away from Ethan and went in, the event was over. People were gathering coats, laughing quietly, saying goodbyes, and he was nowhere to be found. That night, I wrote him a letter. "Dear stranger, I was there. I almost walked in. But life, or maybe fate, had other plans. I'm sorry. I hope you'll invite me again." Girl who trips. When his reply came, it was shorter than usual. "Dear girl, maybe it's better this way. Sometimes the idea of someone is more perfect than the reality." A stranger. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling them like a door closing, but I wasn't ready to let it close for good. His words haunted me. Sometimes the idea of someone is more perfect than the reality, but I couldn't accept that. Not yet. Not when everything inside me was screaming that the stranger in those letters was someone worth fighting for. I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for fate or chance anymore. I was going to find him. The next morning, I returned to the bookstore not for an event, not for an invitation, but simply because I needed to see if he was there. He was, standing behind the counter, shelving books with that same focused expression. When he looked up and caught my eye, there was a flicker of recognition, a spark I hadn't seen before. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Hi," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile that made the room feel warmer. "Hi, I'm the girl who writes to you," I confessed, my cheeks burning. He blinked, then laughed softly. I had a feeling, for the first time, we talked not through letters, but face to face, about everything and nothing. About fears, hopes, the letters that held us together through the silence, and as the afternoon light spilled through the windows, it felt like the beginning of something real, messy, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with fireworks or grand gestures. They start with a letter you almost didn't send. The days that followed our meeting were a whirlwind of new feelings and quiet discoveries. We kept talking, first at the bookstore, then over coffee, and sometimes just through long, meandering walks in the park where the leaves were turning golden. It was strange but also wonderful. How someone who had been a stranger for years suddenly felt like the closest person in the world. Yet, as much as we were drawn to each other, old fears didn't disappear overnight. I worried that the man I'd imagined in my letters was just a shadow, and the real him might not be the same. He worried that the girl who had filled his days with hope through ink and paper would be disappointed by the messy, imperfect me. One evening, sitting in a small cafe, he reached across the table and took my hand. "Clara," he said softly, "I was scared too. Scared that once we met, the magic would disappear. But meeting you has made all those fears seem small." I squeezed his hand back, feeling the warmth of the moment seep into every part of me. "Maybe the magic isn't in the letters," I whispered, "but in us finally seeing each other, just as we began to settle into the promise of something real." Shadows from the past crept back in. One afternoon, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from his sister. The words were simple but urgent. Their mother's health had taken a sudden turn for the worse. I watched as his face tightened with worry, the strong man I'd come to know suddenly vulnerable. "I need to be with her," he said quietly. "I hope you understand." Of course I did. But the timing was brutal. 4 days, Ethan disappeared into hospital visits and family calls. Our letters stopped again, this time exchanged for whispered phone conversations late at night. I missed him fiercely, but I knew some battles couldn't be fought alone. During one long night, I sat at my desk and wrote him a letter not to send, but to hold onto, a way to make sense of the pain. "Dear Ethan, I'm here. Even when you're far away. Even when the world feels like it's breaking. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere." Clara, when he returned, exhausted but determined. We found each other again, stronger for the struggle, more certain of what mattered most. Ethan's mother's health slowly stabilized, but the experience changed him. He became quieter, more reflective. And I realized that love wasn't just about the moments when everything was perfect, it was about standing together in the hard times, too. We started to share more than just letters and stolen afternoons. One rainy evening, Ethan brought me to the bookstore after closing time. The warm light spilled across the shelves and he handed me a small, wrapped package. Inside was a journal blank. except for the first page, where he'd written, "For all the stories we've yet to write." Together. I looked up, tears filling my eyes. "We're not just writing letters anymore," he said softly. "We're writing a life." That night, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. Life with Ethan wasn't always easy. The bookstore struggled to stay afloat in a world rushing toward digital everything. Our time together was often interrupted by work, worry, and the weight of expectations from family, from society, and sometimes from ourselves. I still dreamed of illustrating children's books, but fear kept me from starting. One evening, as we sat amidst stacks of books and flickering candles, Ethan looked at me with quiet encouragement. "Clara, you've been hiding your gift for too long. Let me see it. Let me help you." His belief in me was like a spark, lighting a fire I hadn't known was smoldering. With his support, I began to draw again, first small sketches, then pages filled with color and life. But all doubts whispered in the background. What if I wasn't good enough? What if this was just another dream that would slip away? Ethan held my hand, steady and unwavering, reminding me that sometimes the hardest part is simply starting. The morning sun streamed through my studio window as I carefully added the final touches to my first illustrated story. It was imperfect, rough edges, and all, but it was mine. With Ethan's encouragement, I sent it to a small local publisher, my heart pounding as I clicked send. Days stretched into weeks as I waited, wrestling with doubt and hope. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. The publisher loved my work and wanted to meet. I couldn't stop smiling. That evening, I shared the news with Ethan over dinner, watching the light in his eyes that mirrored my own excitement. "This is just the beginning, Clara," he said, "and I'll be here every step of the way." In that moment, I realized how far we'd come, not just from anonymous letters and missed chances, but to a future filled with possibility. The call from the publisher had been a spark, but the path ahead was full of twists and turns. With each step closer to making my dream real, I felt both exhilaration and fear swirl inside me. Ethan was my anchor through it all, reminding me to breathe, to believe, to keep going. But the bookstore was struggling more than ever. The rise of online sales and e-books was a storm we couldn't ignore. One evening, as we sat surrounded by the quiet rows of books, Ethan confessed his worries. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this going," he said, voice low but steady. "But I do know I don't want to give up. Not now. Not with you here." We decided to dream bigger, hosting community events, poetry nights, art shows, anything to keep the bookstore alive and vibrant. It was hard work, but every smile from a visitor, every shared story, reminded us why we fought. Together, we were building more than just a business. We were building a home. The bookstore buzzed with new energy, walls adorned with local art, shelves holding not just books but memories and dreams. Our poetry nights became a town favorite, drawing strangers who quickly felt like friends. Through it all, Ethan and I found strength in each other, learning that love wasn't about perfection, but presence. One evening, after a successful event, he took my hand and said, "Clara, this place, these moments, they're ours. And I want to build more like them with you." Tears filled my eyes as I realized that the letters, the waiting, the fear, it had all led to this, our imperfect, beautiful life together. Not every day was bright and hopeful. One winter, a fierce storm swept through town, damaging the bookstore's roof and flooding part of the basement. The repairs drained our savings and tested our resolve. There were nights when exhaustion pressed heavy, and doubts crept in like unwelcome guests. But in those moments, we leaned on each other more than ever. "I believe in us," Ethan whispered one cold evening, wrapping me in a warm embrace, and I knew no matter the storms outside or inside, we would weather them together. After the storm, the bookstore felt different, scarred but alive. We cleaned, repaired, and painted, turning broken places into new beginnings. One afternoon, a local reporter came by to write a story about our struggles and the community's support. The article brought visitors from nearby towns, curious and eager to be part of our story. It reminded us that sometimes light shines brightest through the cracks. With every challenge, our love grew deeper, rooted not in ease, but in resilience. Spring arrived with blooming flowers and fresh hopes. The bookstore thrived not just as a business, but as a sanctuary for everyone who walked through its doors. One evening, surrounded by friends and familiar faces, Ethan took my hand and spoke words I dreamed of but never dared to hope for. "Clara, will you marry me?" Tears welled up as I said yes, knowing that this was more than a promise. It was the continuation of a love story that had started with two strangers and a stack of letters. As we stood there, hearts full, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come after the longest waits. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, spread love.